Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to continue the series on the Pirc Defense with one of the best attacking setups for white, the 150 attack. The 150 attack is a very simple idea to battle the Pirc, and it sort of goes against the main idea of the opening, and it prevents black from creating his usual setup with g6, bishop g7 and breaking through with c5 or e5, and that's what makes it a wonderful weapon, because most players who play the Pirc Defense will feel uncomfortable outside of their normal opening setups. So after e4, pawn to d6, the Pirc Defense, we already discussed this. The Pirc is a hyper-modern opening which doesn't take up the center for black, but allows white to create a broad center himself, and black prepares to fianchetto his bishop with bishop to g7, castle short, and then either play e5 or c5 to break open white's newly created center. White accepts d4, knight to f6, attacking the e4 pawn. The best move for white is to defend with knight to c3. And here black plays g6. We've already been over the Austrian attack with f4 and knight to f3, which is the classical variation. And today we are going to go over one attacking setup which is probably the most unusual way to play against the Pirc, and the only one that's very different than all the other variations. And that's the 150 attack. And the 150 attack goes for the setup which is often seen in the Sicilian defense for white, where white plays bishop to e3, queen to d2, castles long, and these moves are going to be played in the 150 attack every game if you manage to play them, and if you've managed, it means you've succeeded. Now, playing this is sort of like playing against the Dragon Sicilian, but without the c-pawn not being exchanged for the d-pawn. And you can see that the same plan should work here too. So white has a very simple idea of castling queenside and going for a kingside attack. Usually, white is going to play f3 to support the move g4 and to prevent any of black's pieces from entering the g4 square. And he's going to have a setup with pawns like this. His king castled long, and his queen and bishop on these two squares striking at this diagonal. So this is what white is trying to do. This is the 150 attack. And that's what it's called in the Pirc Defense. It is also called the English attack and the Yugoslav attack, which are similar, and it's basically the same setup. The only difference is that you play the English attack or the Yugoslav attack against black's defenses, in which he is prepared for that. In the Pirc, black doesn't really want to get out of his comfort zone. Okay, so the move g6, and black starts the 150 attack with playing bishop to e3. Here black has only one move, and that's the move c6, because black needs to create queenside counterplay. Black's plan is c6, b5, trying to create a queenside attack before white can get a free hand on the king side and on the queen side. A very common mistake which we are going to see is black continuing with his normal plan with bishop to g7, and basically what black is trying to do against the 150 attack is to delay putting his bishop to g7 to make this attack less strong. And if the bishop isn't on g7, then the move bishop to h6 isn't a good move, and black will want to delay that as much as possible. Now, a very common mistake, as I said, bishop to g7, and here white simply continues with queen to d2. Black should now continue with c6, but if he castles, let's see this first. So c6 is the main move here, even though white isn't that much better or anything. White has a slight advantage, but he has a very simple plan. Bishop h6, the best move is to take. You can also castle, but it basically comes down to the same thing. Bishop takes, queen takes, e5 now, opening up the center, and this is very risky for black, you can see that. If after bishop h6 black castles, then takes, and h4. I mean, it's so simple that you really don't have to think about your moves. You're going to play f3, g4, or you're simply going to play h5, knight h5 takes. Let's say black plays e5 here, h5 takes. You have already made attack. I mean, you can castle here and a free hand on the king side. So playing bishop to g7 is a bad move, because not because the game is lost, but because you are giving white a simple attacking plan. So bishop to g7 should be delayed, and that's usually considered a mistake in this system, because white has already given up his hand, sort of, and white told you what he's going to do, so why play into white's advantages? So don't play bishop to e7, to g7. After bishop to e3, the main move is c6, trying to get pressure on the queen side. Ironically, the engines prefer bishop to g7, but they don't really understand how humans feel when they are getting attacked, so I would recommend you don't play this, because it's going to be really hard to defend. After c6, white simply continues with queen to d2. There is one more move, and that is the move h3 after c6, and h3 is sort of designed to provoke the move bishop to g7, and then you can continue with your normal plan, but black should just ignore the move h3 and continue with knight b to d7. After knight b to d7, the main move is knight to f3. You can also play f4, but knight to f3 is better. Queen c7, a4, preventing b5, bishop g7 now, queen to d2 castles, bishop h6, and you have the same position, but black has sort of gained the tempo because white played h3, which is useful in some positions, but not really that much here. And the other thing is that once white has played a4 and knight to f3, then he can no longer get this setup because the pawn is a liability and you can't play f3, so the attack doesn't really work anymore. And this line with h3 is called the Sveshnikov-Jansa attack, and I wouldn't recommend that because it's a weird combination of a few openings for white, and I just like straightforward play more. So after c6, continue with queen to d2, going for your normal plan, even though the bishop isn't on g7 yet. Black has to play b5 here. That's the best move, gaining space on the queen side, preparing to fianchetto his queenside bishop and put pressure along this diagonal. Here once again, if after queen to d2 black plays bishop to g7, then bishop h6 and white is much better. Black can either castle or take once again and you get the same position. So after queen to d2, b5. Another move after queen to d2 is knight b to d7. That's a sideline which black could opt to play, but I prefer the move b5 because it's more aggressive and I think it's much more precise. After knight b to d7, white can continue either with the f4, getting a sort of Austrian attack setup, and after bishop to g7 you have transposed to the Austrian attack, or you can continue with knight to f3 and sort of play for the classical variation, but with black having played c6, which makes c5 sort of a waste of one tempo. So black is going to play e5, you're going to castle long, queen e7, h3, bishop g7, bishop h6 castles, bishop takes, king takes. You're going for the same idea, but as I said, it's slightly weaker because you don't have the f3 pawn here. It's going to be harder to push through with g4, h4. So after knight b to d7, white is okay, and I think that b5 is a more precise move, but knight to b7, knight b to d7 is playable as well. So black might consider this. Anyway, after knight b to d7, I wouldn't recommend going for the classical. I would recommend the move f4 because it's just much more aggressive, and e5 here isn't possible. So we are basically asking black to play the move c5, which is going to be weaker because he already played pawn to c6. And you can even consider knight f3, bishop to e2 castle, or knight f3, bishop to d3 castle, or you can castle long. So you have a lot of options in your position, while on the other hand black is basically forced to play bishop g7 castle short. So after knight b d7, either going for a classical setup or an Austrian attack setup, I would recommend the Austrian attack setup. But after queen to d2, this move isn't the main move, b5 is the main move, and b5 should be played. Here white can continue in two different ways, and this is basically where the 150 attack branches out. There are two approaches to the position. One is less aggressive and another is much more aggressive. And the other is much more aggressive, and I would recommend the more aggressive one. The main move here is bishop to d3. That is the less aggressive move. Developing your pieces in a normal fashion, you're going to play knight to f3 and have a safe position castling short. And, well, I think that isn't as good. After bishop d3, knight b d7, knight f3, e5, castles, bishop b7, de5, de5, a4. This is the main move. And the engines will always like white, but don't be fooled by that. Black isn't much worse or anything. The main move here is a6. If after a4, black plays b4, this move isn't so good because white can continue with knight to e2. And after c5, defending the pawn, white can play knight to g3. transferring his knight into the attack, even though these two squares are taken away. Now after queen to c7, which is the best move, you have bishop to b5, provoking the move a6, and if black doesn't play it, your bishop is too annoying, so a6, and you get your bishop into c4, and you can see that b4 weakened a lot of light squares, and your bishop sort of has much more scope than had black not played b4. So after the move a4, the most common way for black to continue is a6, and after ab, cb, this is the starting position of the main line of the 150 attack. And I will turn on the engine just so that you can see the evaluation. It's +1 for white, but it's nothing major, and it's not really clear what white is doing with this bishop in this line, because it's really cramped in and it doesn't have any squares. The e4 pawn is a liability. The dark squared bishop is okay, putting a lot of pressure on black's position, but in this setup, once this happens, bishop h6 isn't really that strong because you don't have an attack, and this bishop is a monster now. And this is why I believe that the move bishop to d3, even though white in theory has a better position, isn't that strong because you don't have a simple plan of attack. A much better continuation after, let's go over the opening moves again. So bishop to e3, the first move after g6, bishop to e3 going for the 150 attack. Well, black continues with c6, as we said, not bishop to g7, queen to d2, preparing your attack, b5. Here we looked at bishop to d3, and I would recommend another move, simply creating your normal attacking setup, preparing for g4, h4, and that's the move f3. You don't really have to think about it too much, and once you have created this pawn chain, and you have this setup with your queenside pawns intact, you can castle long, and you can attack, and you don't even have to castle yet. You can simply attack the black king. You have to know that the black king is on e8, and it's a couple of moves away from castling, and you have a much faster attack. Knight b to d7 is the main move. Once again, if bishop to g7, then bishop to h6, and white now pushes forward. g4. The best move is knight to b6 to make sure you have created a square for your other knight, to make sure it doesn't have to go to g8, which would be ridiculous. So knight b6, h4, preparing the move h5 or the move g5. a5 is the main move for black, and now h5, b4, knight to d1, and this isn't really a problem. Your knight is fine here. You can either play b3, knight b2, knight c4, and get your bishop to c4 after an exchange, or you can play your knight. You can play your knight, and I've played this in a real game, knight f2, knight h3, knight to g5, and this is a great attacking piece. So after knight to d1, this is much better for white. If I turned on the engine now, this is almost 1.5. So bishop to g7, that's the main move for black, believe it or not, even though it looks very risky. a3 now, trying to prevent black from expanding too much. Takes, rook takes, gh5, g5 is the main move. Knight f to d7 using the freed up square with the knight going to b6. And now rook takes h5. I mean, who wouldn't want to have white here? What's the problem with this position? The engines love it. I as a human player think it's much better, and I'm not sure if you asked 100 people who would rather have black here, that maybe one of them would say black, but I'm not sure even about that. And this is just a great attacking position for white. Black here continues with d5, that's the best move, and the main move here is just to keep the tension and reroute your bishop around to the g3 square. But I prefer the move e5. I think it's much better because you block out the bishop. And now a4 by black trying to expand on the queen side. And once again, a very safe position for white. Black can't really do much to prevent f4, f5. Black can't really do much to prevent a move such as queen to h2, putting pressure on the h7 pawn, and just black is going a pawn down. And as I said, there's always a plan of rerouting this knight into the attack. Now you have a perfect square on g4, and a move such as knight f2, knight g4, and even here sacrificing, getting your queen here, would be devastating for black. And from here on, you could find a lot of attacking plans for white. On the other hand, show me an attacking plan for black. It's really hard to find one. Okay, let's go over the opening moves once again. So e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e3, c6, the best move for black. Once again, if bishop to g7, then you play queen to d2. Black played the perfect move for you, a mistake. c6, queen d2, b5. I would recommend f3. I think that's the best move. Knight b to d7, g4, creating an attack. And I wanted to show you one game. Wait, from which position? Okay, let me go back here. Okay, yeah, I wanted to show you one game from this position which Judith Polgar played against Jan Timman in 98. Wait. Okay, so Judith Polgar has the white pieces and Jan Timman has the black pieces. Of course, Judith is rated in 98 she was rated 2700, so she was very strong. Jan Timman played the main move here, knight b to d7, and Judith Polgar went for the move d5, which is another interesting idea. And instead of the move g4, you could attack in the center as well. And I'm not really sure that the move d5 is precise, because you allow black to get the c5 square and the e5 square, which could come in handy for him. But she played the move d5. And now we have bishop to b7. He didn't take. d6, bishop c6, knight takes b5, winning a pawn. Bishop g7, knight to d4, attacking the bishop. Bishop b7, bishop b5, pinning the knight, castles, knight g2, a6, bishop c6. You can see that this is much more active for white. This bishop is dampened, it has no scope on the diagonal. White is going to castle, and white can in fact castle both sides. It's safer to castle short, but she could have castled long as well. Queen c8 here, bishop b7, queen b7, knight b3, and white's position is just safe. I mean, the only problem is this Pirc Defense bishop, which is very strong, but I suppose that a move such as c3 could slow it down, but it isn't really necessary. d5 here by black, ed5, knight d5, bishop d4, challenging the bishop and simply exchanging black's best piece. And now, if you count the material, Judith Polgar is still a pawn up, and she went on to win safely. So, in this position after f3, it's quite hard for black to defend. After knight b to d7, g4 is the main move, but white has played several things. d5, which Judith Polgar played, has only been played 36 times. Bishop d3 has been played, h4 has been played, knight g2 e2 has been played, a4 has been played, castles long. I mean, all of these moves are playable, so once you get this position, and it's very likely that you are going to get it because it's the main line, the only difference is that white chose to play f3 instead of bishop to d3, you have a free hand in the attack, and I just love it. I think there isn't that much a player with the black pieces could do to prevent you getting this setup. So d4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e3, c6, queen d2, b5, f3. There you have it. If black plays knight b to d7, which is by far the best move, now you choose. You either play g4, you play h4, you play d5, you can even castle. I mean, a wonderful position. Okay. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you liked this video on the 150 attack. I hope you got an idea how to crush the Pirc Defense now, and let me know how it goes. Let me know if you've played this against the Pirc, and stay tuned for more chess. Thanks very much. Bye bye.